We're now ready for the second session here at Glendispinner Farm for the Dodson Horror Masterclass. Again, 2 new horses. So once again, I'll hand you over to Harry and Laura, who will explain and tell you what they're riding.
So this is a 6-year-old mare. She's called Leola. She's show jumped in Germany. We bought her, well, Maggie Sargent bought her a couple of months ago. She's now done 3 pre-novices. She won her first one and then was, I think she was 5th on Sunday. So this will be a whole new experience to her. She's done a few little things in the school, but mainly been actually learning real life cross country because she didn't have a clue what water, ditches and steps were. So this will be as much of a learning curve for me to see what she's like with skinnies and you know, different things in an arena with people watching her. So I can't really tell you much more about her because I don't personally know that much more about her, other than she's a nice jumper, she moves nice, and that's why I bought her. So we'll see what her attitude's like now.
Okay, so this is a horse that most of the horses I have are sort of come to me as 3, 4 or 5-year-olds, normally 3 or 4-year-olds. But this is another horse. The last one obviously I got at the end of his 6-year-old year, he's now 7. This one I bought on behalf of Nona in December, and he was predominantly hunting before that. He was owned by a really nice girl who sort of had him, did a bit of eventing on him. He consistently was somewhere between 42 and 47 penalties after the dressage, so I think consistently in last place. But he had a really good brain, and although in a way he hadn't learned much of the sort of technical scales of training and had a sort of strong platform to start from, what he did have and what she was brilliant at was he had real sort of confidence, real faith and trust in his rider, and he's a charming person. So I was looking for, on behalf of Nona, who's really nice and is I know quite well, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying she's sort of had a strong opinion of what she wanted in a horse, in that she likes a good old-fashioned Irish type, of which he's that. She's also of a fairly good age, and so she didn't want to hang around for years waiting for a 4-year-old to come to fruition. So it's sort of suited to buy him, and without necessarily the hugest budget, he was affordable. I saw sort of some glimmers of hope in him, but he's put on 90 kilos since I bought him, and he's not exactly looking fat now. But I was very worried for the first 2 months I bought him. I like to think he was a diamond in the rough, but I was a bit concerned that actually we'd bought a stone, and he was no more than that. But the nice thing is, the longer we've had him, the more of what I hoped he would be, he's become, and I've done some intermediates on him this season. So started with some novices, he moved up to intermediate, and then he was second in the 3-star at Houghton, which was great, and hopefully he'll move up to 4-star next year. So in a way, he's been able to crack on. And like I said, although he lacks a lot in his training, he is at least brave and honest. So suppleness doesn't come overnight, but sort of developing the quality of his paces, his general sort of suppleness and elasticity is going to be the key thing for him. But I'm quite looking forward to having a winter together where he can actually really come on. And I deliberately didn't take him, or I deliberately am not going to take him to an autumn 3-day event, because I'd like him to be able to stay and work a bit more, just have a short holiday and not need to recover from several months of sort of fitness work and then running around a 10-minute course. So by just doing some 1-day events on him and then being able to keep him in training means that hopefully he can make a bit more progress over the winter and come out as a better horse.
So whilst Harry has a little warm up, I'll talk a bit, like I said before, as riders, we have different ideas and different ways we introduce our horses to things. For me, obviously the way cross-country courses are going these days, we're asking our horses to jump, near on impossible skinny fences, and they've got to, in my eyes, the horses have got to lock on to the flags. So when I'm training the young horses and the older horses, I always like to have a set of flags, because at the end of the day, the horses, like Harry was talking about earlier, there's a lot of distractions for the horses. You're going past a tree, going past a rock and things like that, and then suddenly you're asking them to jump something really random, having gone past something random. So for me, it's about the horses focusing on those flags and learning to go between the flags regardless of what is between the flags. So for me, I will always start the young horses, and I like to do it right from 4-year-olds. They've got to learn the idea of going between the flags. So this fence in the middle here, just have the poles on the ground. It's obviously a very skinny fence, so I have the V poles on, so the V poles are wider at the base and then go narrower at the top. So it encourages the horse to focus. Obviously they start looking at the wide part of the poles, and then their eyes are drawn to that centre point. And I will always start in walk, because I think you give the horses more time to assess what's in front of them. And obviously when you jump down a drop fence and you've got to be at a skinny, sometimes you're on a long rein. So I like to do everything pretty much on a long rein. So need them to look down, just like she did there. She focused and looked down, looked at the pole and went straight through the middle. So once they do it, if they feel really confident and like they didn't have a wobble or they didn't get spooked by going through a narrow gap, then I'll do it in trot. And I do it in a very slow trot to start with, and again on a slightly long rein, just so. And if she wants to come back to walk, that's fine, because for me that's her learning. She maybe doesn't feel all that comfortable at the moment, but about going between that skinny gap. Some horses find it a bit spookier than others, going through a gap. So I don't hurry her, I don't rush her, I give her as much time as she needs. And then this time she's been a lot more confident about going between the gap. So because she wasn't great the first time, I think I'll do it again in trot before I think about coming in canter. And always coming left rein, right rein, left rein, right rein. Because at that time she really looked, she sorted her footwork out, she did a little pop over the pole, and it was all very straightforward. So now I'd come in canter. So again, now she just feels like she doesn't mind what I'm asking her to do. So that was exactly what I'd want of her. She came nice and quiet, dropped her head, had a little pop over the pole, but there was nothing, nothing to it really. So Ellie, would you mind popping a pole up on one of the white poles up, please? And we'll have it, the other one as a ground rail. So then once I've done that, I'll build a little fence, and I'll have a nice ground rail, so that again they've got something to look at and draw them in. And again, now I'll go back to coming in trot, and again on a fairly loose rein. Yeah. And I'm not worried about her knocking the jump down, At the moment, the biggest focus for me is that she goes between the flags and she stays straight, which she did, and then the more natural it comes to her, she'll then be able to start thinking about her footwork like that. She obviously took off a little bit early out of my hand, and that's again why I think trotting is good, because like Harry said, you're putting the responsibility on the horse. Yeah. And interestingly, because she obviously sort of knocked it down, but actually the footwork that she did, she really dropped her head and neck, looked and did a little pat of the floor with her legs, and that for me is more important than her actually clearing it, throwing a big jump. She really thought about what she was doing, so now she feels confident I come in canter. And that's, you know, really good. She was not on any kind of distance around the corner, but she just shortened herself, dropped her head and neck, looked, and she was always focused on that tiny skinny. So for me, that's, you know, how I start. And now, Ellie, if you drop the poles on the floor, please. So now she's feeling like she knows where that jump is, what that jump is for. No, the poles on the side. I take the V poles away, but almost keep them there. So they're there, but they're on the floor. So now she's still got to focus even more on the skinny fence. And she went a little bit green. She didn't feel like she drew into that as much as she had the time before. So at that time she did really nice. So if we just take those poles completely away, please, the blue and white poles. So then once they've done that, then I'll come round, and now it's just a skinny fence on its own. And that's exactly what I want her to do. So she's kind of shown you, you know, the differences between when she first went to it without the poles. She sort of was like, oh God, where have the poles gone? But she was still focused enough on the jump. So for me, that's how I start the babies over a skinny fence.
Very good. So the interesting thing, as Laura said, is we deliberately wanted to do our own things in this and sort of combine them, because there is no right and wrong. There are many ways to skin a cat, and the important thing is that the horses understand and they develop the footwork. And something I like to do is just to start jumping them out of walk, where it's hard work for them. It's all upward thrust rather than jumping out of momentum. But that enables them, the first thing before we start getting into the accuracy of jumping a narrow fence, to be able to actually just sit down and push off. It also gets the rider in the right place, because you have to sit back and lengthen the rein. Now, the key thing, and I'm going to ask this question to Laura rather unfairly, but the key thing to being in the correct position cross country is to not be in balance. Because with show jumping, you want to be in perfect balance. You want to be right in the middle of the horse, on the approach to a fence, on takeoff, through the air, and on landing. But across country, you do not want to be in the perfect balance for the horse. You want to be behind the movement. And this is explained by Newton's first law. Is anyone here doing physics? Any 18-year-olds? Any professors? Does anyone know what Newton's first law is? Okay, we've got some mutterings, which I think might be people guessing it, or saying, how ridiculous. Any guesses? Okay, any of Newton's laws? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That is one of his laws, but it's not his first law. Any others? Okay, another is energy can be transferred from one form to another, but it cannot be created or destroyed. But the first law is that an object travels a constant velocity until another force acts. Now what that means is an object keeps moving at the same speed until something happens to it. So if you're in a car and you're driving along and the car crashes, it rapidly decelerates, and you, being the object, are going to carry on going at the same speed as the car was going until another force acts. So in other words, until something stops you. And that is either going to be the windscreen when you crash into it, or it's going to be the seatbelt. When you're on a horse, if you're approaching a cross-country fence and the horse hesitates on takeoff, or if it backs off on the approach, if it hesitates on takeoff, if it leaves a knee on the fence, or if it stumbles on landing and knuckles down onto his knees on landing. In any of those cases, there's a momentary rapid deceleration. And according to Newton, if you were sitting in the perfect show jumping position, you were going to carry on going unless another force acts. So the other force isn't going to be just getting your shoulders up and back, which is what a lot of people think it is. It's going to be putting your feet on the dashboard. So if you're in a car and you've got no seatbelts and you want to try and stop yourself going through the windscreen and you put your feet up on the dashboard, that's a force, your energy into your feet and your force against your feet is what's going to stop your body going forwards. And it's the same when we're going cross country. So the key thing is to be short enough in your stirrups. And most people, massive sweeping statement, but most people ride too long, because when you're in the right position, and Laura is a classic example of somebody who rides at a good length, nice and short in the stirrup, and when you're in the right position and your feet are in front of you and your seat goes slightly out the back, it's amazing how much length you gain through your leg. When you're riding around at the start, it feels uncomfortably short. If it feels uncomfortably short in the collecting ring, normally it's the right length when you're galloping cross country. So just going back to the idea of jumping out of a walk, it teaches the horse just to sit down on their hocks, and the rider must be behind. As soon as you creep up the neck, the horse stops. So it's great discipline from a rider's point of view to stay back, your feet in front of you, and if you do this right, it will feel slightly uncomfortable, because when it's out of a walk, everything gets exaggerated. But we're not looking to be in the middle of the horse. But when you start cantering, it all happens much quicker, and the delay between takeoff and you going with the horse is much briefer. So once we've got jumping out of a walk, we can then start, if you just put up this fence, please. Well done. We can then start adding in jumping some other fences. So they've understood about taking away the momentum and just coming nice and slowly. So now if the horse doesn't understand this exercise, he might well go left or right or jump it in a slightly green way. But either way, I'm going to stay in the right position, and part of the discipline for me is never to glide past the fence. So that's why if he doesn't understand it, and I'm fully prepared for him not to understand it, there's absolutely no reason why he should. But if he doesn't understand it, and he tries to go left or right, what normally happens is their ears they're like antennae, and instead of locking onto the fence, they try and pick up the gaps either side. And in doing so, they go to run past. And as they go to run past, and in a way it would have been nice to have brought absolute babies, because he hasn't really done much of this, but the younger the horse, the more likely they are to do it. If they go to run past, I just gently, it's absolutely not a reprimand, but just a couple of steps back, so I can then walk back up to it and jump it. So it's never a case of turning away. It's never a case of doing a circle. It's simply that, can you put that up? It's simply that I'm coming up to a fence and we're going to jump over it. And they've got the footwork already by walking over fences like this, that they've understood the footwork and the technique to sit down and push off, but then it's starting to add in the accuracy as well. And then as you see, we can start to develop the height of the fence, and you can just do the same up there. But the principles are very much the same as Laura's, which is, like she said, being on a long rein, so the horse can read it, the horse can work out their own footwork. And where I like about coming out of a walk with this delay is the most important thing for the rider is to stay behind the movement. If the rider gets in front of the movement, then they deserve for their horse to stop, and probably for them to fall off, including me if I do it. The other thing is, it starts teaching you just to steer with your heels rather than with your hands, because we're not looking cross-country for the horse to follow the rein in the same way as we are in the other phases, where you're looking to get flexion around the circle, where the horse must follow the rein one way and then follow the rein the other way. Because when you're traveling cross-country and you've got that added momentum, if you turn the horse's head, what tends to happen is the head goes one way and the shoulder goes the other way. And when you add in speed, you've got increased momentum, and the horse tends to follow the shoulder, not the head. So if the head goes to the right and the shoulder goes to the left, the horse tends to drift out. So what we're looking to do from a steering point of view is to be able to steer almost as if we've got pieces of string, a very thin bit of fishing wire, fishing line, attached from the heel to the horse's eyeball. So you're communicating with the horse just by a little poke with the rib cage on one side or the other. And the hand is simply challenging, but we're not looking to manhandle. And that's where you get, it's this sort of philosophy of almost, I talk sometimes about riding a unicycle, that for me, this is what's important here. Not just from a point of view of what you might get in terms of the power and the engagement in the engine, but also that the horse has absolutely not taken off until the hind legs have left the floor. So a little bit like an aeroplane going down the runway. The aeroplane can go to take off, and the front wheel comes off the tarmac, and then the pilot can decide to abort. And as the front wheel comes off the tarmac, the pilot aborts and the wheel goes back down. And it's the same for the horse. They can go to jump, take their front legs off the ground, the rider goes up the neck thinking they've made it, and then the horse aborts, probably like this. The horse aborts and goes back down to land. So we're thinking of not taking off until the hind legs have actually pushed upwards or pushed down and the horse has taken off and the hind legs have left the ground.
So my horse there, obviously she was very good the first couple of times. And then when I came off the right rein, she sort of suddenly saw an exit one way. And like Harry said, not telling her off, but just coming back and representing. And then obviously she suddenly saw the exit the other way back, and then she was like, oh, okay, that's not really the way out. So then she went back to being focused, and that's a classic, with a young horse, sometimes they get it right the first couple of times through a little bit of naivety, and then they suddenly go, there's a slightly easier way of doing this, and that's by going around the outside and not actually doing what you're asking. So there's no point just doing it once or twice and thinking, oh, that's great, they know what they're doing, because you've almost got to go push them through that barrier of making a mistake. Like we said, it's the only way they learn is by making a mistake. So for me, she showed almost a bit of naivety to start with. She was like, yeah, that's grand, that's fine. And then she suddenly was like, well, why should I jump that when I can just go round? It's much easier. So then I can, teach her that no, that's not an option. Didn't get stressed about it, just let her realise that she couldn't go right, she couldn't go left, and really the only way to go was straight. So then she was very good, just came back to this one and was good again. So I think Harry's now making things a bit narrower. Obviously he's come out of the turn, and again a bit the same concept as having the V-poles I had earlier, just to make them draw into that very small block, and then obviously once he's done it one way and he's done it the other way, that makes it very, very difficult for them because they've got nothing holding them in, and then they've got to figure out with their eyes and their brain that actually you're asking them to jump something very, that is narrower than the horse itself. But if they drift one way or the other over it, they're then going to land on the poles. So they've got to really be straight and be honest. Are you going to go from there? And you can see if you watch, if Harry comes and does that again, if you watch, this horse has got a great expression on his face. He sort of, as he comes down, he's almost switched off. He's just walking along, minding his own business. And that time before, when he turned, and he was obviously from a standstill, and he walked, and the horse suddenly looked up, and he thought, right, there's something there. And that time, interestingly, the horse didn't really pick up. So the time before, his ears almost went to the side, and he almost had a slightly real concentrating look on his face, like, this is really hard, I've really got to focus. And what's interesting now is once he had that little bit of a wobble, he then had a little bit of a wobble at the next one. And that's what the horses, once they suddenly realise that there is another way out, then that's when they learn to run out, and that's where you've got to be really focused. And there he sort of looked left, then he looked right, and then he was like, okay, that's where I've got to go.
And you'll notice when I warmed up, I deliberately jumped the wings of the fence behind me and the one up there out of trot, just jumping one side of the rustic pole or one side of that coloured pole. So the horse has to use his intellect, that 1 minute he's been asked to jump the wing, the next minute he's absolutely not to jump the wing, he's to jump the block. And as Laura said, the block is much more difficult than anything they might get in competition. So this is just a very slight difference in the philosophy, in that I don't train with flags. For me, it's important that you can jump something as difficult as this without having any kind of physical barrier. So it is purely a mental barrier, and the idea is that you could get a postage stamp and lick it and stick it onto the fence, and is absolutely not good enough to jump 2 inches to the right or 2 inches to the left. And it's amazing the ability. I'd be sort of fairly conservative in terms of attitude to sort of sixth sense and witchcraft and luck and things like that. But it is amazing how you can think something and it transfers through to the horse. The power of your eyes on the fence, the horse searches for the object you're looking at. And just something I've observed over the years is when there's something on the ground which a horse is likely to spook at. If, for example, the blocks here with the light-coloured rustic pole on is a plastic bag, and I'm going up here, so it's going to be on my right ahead of me. Now, if you know that you're on a fresh horse and that's stuck in the hedge there and is flapping around, and you know the horse is likely to whip around and spook at it, what I try and do is to pick something that's mirror vision to that. So instead of being 11 metres ahead of me and 4 metres to my right, I'm going to imagine it's 11 metres ahead of me and 4 metres to my left. And I will focus on that point. And it's incredible how the horse's ears, like antennae, go from looking at that to then searching for something on the left which isn't there. And as you go past it, they're sort of flicking one ear back onto this one on the right, but the whole time it's sort of popping off that and coming onto the imaginary object on the left, looking for it. By the time they realise there isn't something on your left, the horse has gone past the object on your right. And in creating that, you're not being a caricature and turning your body like this and staring over there. It's literally the eyeballs, nothing else. The head doesn't move, nothing else. But the horse has the ability to pick up on something psychological between you and them. And you can use that hugely to your advantage when you've got a difficult horse, but also in looking for these very difficult lines with narrow fences. And a lot of this, it's a little bit like a game. That same instinct that they've got to look for gaps, you can channel that instinct so they can start to look for fences. And once they find that easy, it's lovely. You feel you can bail out, and the horse is going to carry on and jump a fence as narrow as this on its own, because they've started to clock on and read the fences and look for the fences.
I think also what we can do with these fences is encourage the horses to learn about jumping a corner fence. Obviously, when we've got the corner fences with the babies, you can get away with jumping them sort of straight because there's nothing wide about them. But when we get up to advanced and 4 and 5 star, the corners are slightly ridiculous, and you have to be so precise on your angle. And the best way of thinking about it is dissecting straight down the middle of the corner, and that's your straight line. That's what you ride at a right angle at, is that line of dissection through the middle of the fence. Harry can probably use bigger words than me to describe that and explain it, but that simple terms is draw a line down the middle and ride at it at right angle. I'll start with this corner here because it's a little bit narrower than the one at the end. With a real baby, she sort of is, but hopefully she'll be all right, is I would start by putting a pole on that corner so that they don't see the exit, they don't see the way out.
And obviously the first thing here is, having jumped those fences already from a different direction, the horse has to intellectually understand the questions being asked, so they're not being asked to jump into the corner, which they've just been doing when they've gone over the block across the diagonal, but instead you're looking for them to see a very clear straight line. And again, using your eyesight, often where you look to the point where you're landing rather than the point on the fence, it can just guide the horse. Generally, I always try and look up and look on the horizon, but sometimes when you're jumping something like this and the horse hasn't understood where they're going, focusing on the bit of sand you're going to land on can just guide the horse in the right direction.
So it's really important that everything you do one way, you do the other. So you learn that if the horses have a better way, coming off one way to the other. Oh. So one thing I already sort of know about this horse is she almost tucks her head in too much, very show jumper type thing to do. She's probably spent most of her life in draw reins only looking at the ground, and for cross country they need to use their head and neck, they need to use their vision, they've got to look up. So as you saw when she jumped that first corner, and almost as she came out of the turn, she was very looking down, she didn't look what was in front of her. So that's something that we need to work on with her, is getting her to bring her vision and her balance up so that she's focused on what's in front of her, not what's underneath her feet, only a stride ahead of where her feet are.
Right. What we're going to do now is just practice just flowing over some fences. Laura, is there much, apart from what we do now, is there much else you want to do?
I don't know, unless anyone's got any questions or suggestions of what they want to see, or...
Well, I've got a suggestion.
Oh, good.
So, one of the things is about cross-country. We talked briefly at the beginning about the line, and the line is more important than the distance, but also through doing what Laura's just been doing out of trot and I was doing out of walk, it allows the horse to use their own decision-making process down to the fence. So they take control of their stride. Now, if you come in a good active canter or good active gallop, the horse can jump off pretty much any stride. And one of the biggest qualities in a cross-country horse is the ability to be able to jump themselves out of trouble. Now, everything we do for dressage is about training perfection. Everything we do for show jumping is about training perfection. And sometimes it's quite good cross-country not ever to deliberately put a horse in a bad spot, but to really try and equip the horse to deal with imperfection and make the best of it. So that can include the footwork of what we've just been doing, so that if a horse comes round the corner and slips 2 strides out from the fence, loses their back end, loses their footing, they can fiddle a stride and jump their way out of it with that independent thought process. But the other thing is that we as riders, it's so technical now riding around some of the big, the sort of 5-star cross-country courses, that you need to be able to focus not just on what you're about to do, but what's ahead of you. So quite often when you're jumping into a combination where you've got the A element in front of you, and then you've got B, and then you've got C, your eye, I try and use the sort of peripheral vision, so your eye will, on the approach, shift from the first fence to the second to the third. So your main central vision is on the third fence, but your peripheral vision is on the first fence. So you're actually not particularly using your eye to the first fence, you're relying on the horse's instinct. So if we just have a canter around over this.
I'll be able to demonstrate this much better than Harry because he's far too perfect at seeing a stride.
If we just have a canter around over this and just work on a big figure of 8 in a sort of cross-country mode. So now just off the back and flow on as if we're going cross-country from A to B. So a complete circuit of the school. Just gliding on. Good, and then just really encouraging the horse just to jump out of off a loose rein, daring something to go wrong, but trusting that it won't. So long rein, let the neck out, let the neck out, let the neck out. Great, and then just come the whole way down the long side. And just kick on a bit more. So well done. Good. And then just let the neck out even more as you come off the turn. Let the neck out and ride forwards. Very good. Okay, and now what Laura's going to do is still the same thing. Kick on down the long side. But this time, she's going to look over her shoulder and look me in the eye. We didn't discuss this bit. Okay, so look at the fence, now look at me, Laura! Laura! Okay. Keep going.
Do you want me to look at you the whole time?
I want you from, when you get onto the straight line, once you've got your clear straight line, I want you to look at me and keep looking at me until you've landed. Good, so right forwards. Good, now look over your shoulder. Look at me. Lovely. Yay.
Harry just wants me to look at him all the time. Have you noticed that? It's a good job Rosie's not here, eh?
Good, look at me. Hey.
It's a bit unnerving when you know you're on a misser and you're not looking at the fence.
It's, in many ways, and I try and discipline myself in a sort of slightly ridiculous way. It's why quite often I sort of end up chatting to fence judges or smiling at somebody in the crowd, because it's quite a good way with the horses just to train them that actually they get used to the fact that once you're on that good line in a good canter, that you start to look away and you are no longer part of the process. Your job, the third part of the exercise, having been on a good line in a good canter and then not interfere, part of that processing of not interfering is just being able to not look. And I don't mind, it doesn't have to be perfect every time. The whole point of these fences is they knock down, but it's just being consistent about it.
They also break as well.
What's that?
Oh.
And the other thing is it means that you probably get a much better canter when you're not looking at the fence, because you know that you've got to sort things out early, because you're not going to leave it to the last 2 strides to start making adjustments.
So I think what we've learned is Harry definitely has practiced this at home, and this is his little showpiece for everybody. Which is very, joking aside, it's very impressive, and it's, as demonstrated by me, it's not very easy. So I'm a normal person and it's not easy, and he's just practiced far too much at home and made it look ridiculously easy. But no, it is something, you know, and that's why even for a rider it's good to come to these things, because like we said, everyone has different ideas, and I shall go home and practice jumping. I'll get a pin-up of Harry and I'll place him in my school and I'll look at him every time I'm jumping. But no, it is good, because as you can see with his horse, he solved every problem by moving forward to the fence when Harry wasn't looking, and that's what cross-country riding is about, and that's why Harry is one of the best cross-country riders in the world. He always has been, and also why he's so fast without ever looking fast is because he's trained his horses to always solve a problem by going forward to a fence. He never gets hooky, he never gets backwards, so he never wastes time, and everything's always smooth. So I think that for everybody, including me, is a little masterclass. So well done, Harry.
Thank you. There is something as well from a safety point of view, that the safest thing you can do cross country, if in doubt, if you're on a completely duff distance, is hit the accelerator pedal. And by going to the brake, that can often be the normal instinct, but often the most dangerous one. There's just something else in this as well, which is that if you come down, for example, to a coffin, you know, rail, ditch, rail, and your job is to set the horse up into a proper coffin canter. Riders nowadays are so good at using their eye and picking up a good distance, and in many ways we train that, particularly in the show jumping, to such a great extent that people can pick up a distance from a long way out. And when you go to change down a gear, so in other words, you go from a sort of galloping, long, relaxed gallop that's efficient, that the horse can sit in all day long, and then you slow down to come to a coffin, and you just raise the body, you put the legs on, and the horse concertina is up together, and it doesn't just go slowly, they end up with plenty of power within them, so that as you slow down, the speed goes down, but at the same time, the revs go up. So the horse is capable of jumping up and down rather than in a flat way across the fence. Now, in the process of bringing the horse back, as you're going forwards, as you come back, quite often, the eye picks up a distance to the coffin. And the first thing a rider does when they see a good distance is they take that. But often they're taking that distance when they're still halfway through the process of changing from a long, flat, economical gallop to that short, active, powerful coffin canter, effectively changing from 5th gear down to 2nd gear. And if you take that too early, you haven't actually got the proper coffin canter yet. And so, joking apart, one of the things I would do in that situation is look away from the fence for 2 seconds, and then, or 1 second, which is quite a long time on the approach to the fence, and then look back at it. And in that time, you continue to ride the setup for a coffin canter, but it means you've effectively seen a distance, you've deliberately said, I'm not going to take that one, and there's two ways of doing that. One is, and people think you're joking when you say this, but one is to shut your eyes, and the other is to look away from the fence. And then when you open your eyes again, you take the next distance that's there. So it's just a case of not being drawn onto something prematurely. So you see a distance, you don't take it, you say, I'll take the next one, you continue to set them up, and then when they're even more back on their hocks, another stride presents itself, and then you're on your true coughing canter and you jump out of that.
Has anyone got any questions? Yeah. So the question, in case you didn't hear, was if we could ride any horse, what horse would we choose? For me, it's very simple. It would be Masterclass Sam, Michael Young's legendary horse. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't ever exuberant. If you saw him at a trot up, he barely moved for a trot. You know, he didn't have this big flashy trot, but A, he was trained beautifully, but B, he just was so accurate and he had such a love of the job, and he looked like a slightly overgrown pony in his way of going. He was clever, his footwork was, you know, so good that it made everything just look perfect, and he looked like he was a fun horse to ride because he enjoyed his job so much, and obviously he was super talented. I'd say he probably wasn't the most talented horse in the world. For me, it was more his heart and his want to do it, which is what I, you know, look for most in a horse. Is, you know, they've got to want to do it. There's no point having a super talented horse that doesn't want to do it and doesn't want to work with you, because they're just going to be a constant disappointment. A horse that maybe isn't as talented but has the heart of a lion and that real will to win, will win more than a super talented horse. So for me, it's every day of the week, it's the Masterclass Sam.
I love Toledo de Cursa, Tom McEwen's horse. Not a particularly easy horse. Tom does a brilliant job with him, but he's a very, very good jumper, but he's also a rangy, athletic horse, the kind of horse that just covers the ground in a very easy way, jumps out of a lovely rhythm, looks like it's actually pretty well within his physical capabilities. He's never at his max. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of horses throughout history. I used to love Lenamore, a little grey horse that Caroline Power did so well with. Again, very different type. He was much more butty, short, close-coupled horse, quite ponyish, but real heart and gallops. But I think one of the great things is, you know, you start to develop a bit of a type as a rider, but the other thing is the versatility of the event horse and how many different stamps and models can cope well. But I would always say it's that ability to jump out of a gallop, but also be trainable in the dressage. And what Laura said about Sam, Michael Young's horse, is that it was that mental approach. Yes, he had a good action. Yes, he was very correct. He had a very good active hind leg, but he just had a very trainable approach, and that's why he was so consistent for so long. The other one, actually, I think is lovely, is Ballymore Class, Oliver Townend's horse. I think he's a proper type. Perfect. Okay. We're just. No, so this is just something to having established the sort of concept of what they're doing. It's then a case of just putting together a bit of a course, which hopefully replicates what they might have to come up in a cross-country test. So if we take these 5 fences on a curve, being 1, the triangle here, 2, the block, 3, the black little narrow one between the 2 white rails, 4, the block over there, and 5, the triangle one with the blue bollard. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and coming the other way, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. So just to set a bit of a course, what we're going to do is jump 1, then miss 2, and then jump 3. Sorry, 1, miss 2, jump 3, miss 4, jump 5. Then change the rein round the school, over the fence in the middle, out of a good gallop, so it replicates what you have in a course where you get back into a galloping rhythm, then you slow down again. You do exactly the same coming from the other way. So 1, miss 2, jump 3, miss 4, jump 5. Then you change the rein again, and you jump the fence in the middle. This time you jump 1 and 2, and you miss 3, and you jump 4 and 5. Change the rein, and then the same 1, 2, miss 3, jump 4, jump 5. And then change the rein, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, change the rein, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to just put a little finale in, which is just sort of the test, just a litmus test to see if they've got it. Do you guys mind just moving those poles to here, please? So what we're going to do to finish up with is change the rein again, and this time you're going to jump 1, 2, 3, and instead of jumping 4 and 5, we're going to turn left and jump this one on its own close to you. And the reason why that's a litmus test is deliberately we haven't trained over that. We haven't shown that to the horses. So, like in a cross-country course, they come round the corner and they only get a chance to see the fence from probably 2 strides, half a second, and they've got to read it and jump it. And if they do that, you know they're completely on song. And if they don't, then we've all got to sit here for another hour and a half while we try and get it right. If you all just come and stand just over here. Well done. Laura, you can go wherever you want.
Are you jumping this one?
I'm going to jump that one, yeah.
Make sure you jump that side
Yeah,
then.
you can.
I think we're safe here.
Now with number 1, 2, miss 3, jump 4 and 5. And the trick here is each time you open them up, is to not only get the body back, but just to allow them enough time for the brain to come back. And with all of this, these are imperfect distances.
Now we all know why Harry's horses are so fit as well.
And while I straighten up for number 1, I try and get my eyes on number 2. So I now look at 2 and I pick up 1 in my peripheral vision. And again, pick up number 4, shift my eyes to number 5. And just close the leg, and he can stand off or chip in. That's his decision. My decision is the line and the speed. And
I think another thing that's really interesting with the way Harry's doing it is obviously the first time he went past number 2, and then the next time he's then asking the horse to jump the fence that he's just gone past. So it's really making sure that he gives very clear aids to the horse so they understand what he's actually asking him to do. And as you can see, the horse hasn't faltered. He's listening, he's waiting for Harry's instructions.
And as I jump the fences in the middle, it's very important that on the approach, because I've got reasonably short range coming to the ones that actually questions, but as I come to fence in the middle, I'm looking to, in a minute, let my range come out, and they come longer now, longer now, longer now, longer now, and then I've got pretty much a buckle, and I shorten them again on landing, meaning that I'm not stuck to the horse's mouth.
We see there the horse was very clever with his feet. The time before he took off a stride early, took a stride out, and that time he was clever. And again there, it's a really scopy big horse, but equally he's very, very clever with his footwork when he needs to be, and that, as you can see, is down to Harry's training. Well, he jumped it on the angle, but I think he jumped it. That was very good. It showed you, everything. Just that exercise alone, the horse has got to be totally on song with the rider. Although he's got to think for himself, he's got to listen, and he's got to wait for instructions. Sometimes when you do a similar kind of exercise, similar kind of route like that, but not exactly the same each time, the horse can get a bit cocky sometimes and think that they know where they're going and what they're doing. That horse, as you saw, never did. He waited for his instructions, and as soon as Harry gave his instructions, he never questioned it. He said, "Yep, that's grand, that's fine. Happy to do what you ask." And that's all down to the training and what we call rideability of the horses, which is really important.
Yeah, and the key thing is, what we're not looking to do is out-train natural instinct. We're looking to enhance natural instinct, develop athleticism, the ability to open and close, the athleticism of their jump, the intellectual independence of thought, and really the position of the rider. But in all of that, we're not looking to dominate and out-train or train out a horse's natural instincts, because ultimately those instincts are far more adept than ours at dealing with fences when they get very big, very solid, and you're traveling at 35 miles an hour. It's the biggest help there is to performance, and it's also the biggest safety mechanism there is in eventing to keep that kind of independent thought. So that's what we're always encouraging.
Well, I'm going to quickly try and get a word in edgeways there before Harry goes on. But I'm sure you'll agree, a fantastic evening of entertainment from both Harry and Laura. Just give them a round of applause. We'll have a Q&A. And I'd like to welcome into the arena the performance horse specialist from Dodson and Horrell, Chloe Dix, who will be here to answer any of your questions as well. So Ben is up here. He's my Annika Rice now, showing my age. There he is. So, anyone got any questions for Laura, or for Harry, or for Chloe? Or are they giving you enough? Anyone? Yep.
This is to both of you, really. Would this be a typical training session you'd do with a young horse, and how often might you do this per week, say?
Sorry.
So is this a typical training session, and if it is, how many times a week would you do it?
For me, definitely, especially with the young horses, but even with the older horses, it's really important not to get a bit complacent and to even go back to basics. And if they've jumped around a really tough course, even if they've gone really well, I like to still go back and put them give them confidence and put them back in their place. But I don't think I wouldn't say there's a set amount of times I would do it. It would very much depend on A, the horse, and B, how they're dealing with it and doing it. Obviously, if they've made a few mistakes, I would do it, continuous days, and until they feel like they've really got it. Then I'd give them maybe a couple of days hacking, let them process it, think about it, and then do it again just to check that they really have got it. And with the older horses, it would be, depending on their competition schedule and things like that. But it wouldn't be as regular for the older horses as the younger ones. But with the younger horses, I like to keep it there. It keeps giving me clues about the horse, and especially when they're young, they change a lot. So one day they can be hanging on the left rein, and a week later they're hanging on the right rein. So it just keeps everything in line and keeps me thinking and knowing each horse as an individual.
Okay, I'd say for me it's sort of the opposite. I would probably do this twice a year max. And it's amazing how horses, from a learning point of view, because this is much more of a mental exercise for them than it is a physical exercise, it's something which, once a penny has dropped, you don't need to necessarily keep going back to it. It's not like developing a horse's trot or encouraging them to stretch or encouraging them to move sideways and be supple and sort of have maneuverability. It's much more of a cognitive bit of learning. So I would do this probably twice a year, and I would do it with all the horses. So 4-year-olds would do a very basic version of this. They'd probably trot into the wings, then they might jump this fence from a walk, and then they might jump the blocks on their sides like we had them initially, so they're not big, and then they go away. And that's far more than any young horse needs to do. Obviously, when they come out as 5-year-olds, or if they're starting off for the first time as 5-year-olds, they do the same thing. They do that in the autumn then as a 5-year-old. By the time they're 6, you then start, not with the racing round in between, but starting jumping them out of canter. But really, from then on, I find that horses are fluent in it. They don't need to keep going back to it. I would just have a tune-up, say twice a year, and each time they might repeat what they did the previous time, or they might just go on a little bit further in the exercise. But all the horses, regardless of their age or stage, start off with the basics. The young ones just peel out of the exercise earlier, whereas the older ones go on and do the whole hog, and you might set up some more complicated lines as well. I did a demo a couple of months ago on an old horse, a retired horse, and the owner lived close to the place where I was doing the demo, and he wouldn't have probably jumped for 5 years, or certainly wouldn't have jumped anything bigger than 2'9", and it was amazing getting on him. He was an absolute master of doing this because they tend to hold that sort of long-term memory of it.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Bridget.
I have to ask a question. Both horses look absolutely superb, and I'd be interested to know what they're fed on, and also any tips that Chloe might give us on producing, a very fit event horse that looks like these two. They look stunning.
Well, I hope they're going to say Dodson and Horrell firstly.
Majority of my horses' sort of baseline diet would be the Elite Sports Muesli, and then depending on the horse, depending on what they look like and how they feel, I add in different things depending on if they're a bit buzzy or if they need a bit more buzz. This horse here, as you can see, she does herself quite well, so she is just on alpha oil and Elite Sports Muesli and a balancer, and she doesn't really need anything else at this stage in her career. She doesn't need too much more energy. She's only at pre-novice level, B100 level, so it's every horse is different, and that's, I think, a real key to remember, is to feed horses as individuals rather than just thinking that what works for one horse doesn't necessarily work for another. And I've found, since been using the Elite Sports Muesli, I think it gives them plenty of energy, but I haven't had any horses go, off their heads on it. So I think it's a really good sort of baseline, starting stall, as I say, for the horses, and change it as and when. And this horse clearly doesn't need it, but if they're struggling slightly with top line and putting weight on, the Build and Glow is a fantastic sort of extra to go with anything like the Elite Sports Muesli, just to give them that bit more top line, and I always think it makes them look fantastic.
Harry?
Okay, so I think the first thing is you can try and save a bit of money on buying a slightly cheaper sort of hoof pick or a cheaper brand of shampoo. But for me, the principle has always been to feed the best feed, and that is particularly relevant if you're dealing with event horses or race horses competing, event horses at a high level or race horses. I think it's relevant for all horses, but particularly where they're operating towards their max of their physical capabilities. And so, I mean, I've sort of always fed, long before I was working with Dodson Hall, I've always fed Dodson Hall feed, but the approach to it can be much simpler than a lot of people make it. You often look in feed rooms and you see 8 different brands of exactly the same type of feed. And what we try and do is to have a reasonably straightforward approach, which is everything gets as many feeds a day as possible. So in the summer, 3 feeds a day, in the winter, 4 feeds a day. And regardless of how much they're getting in a 24-hour period, that's divided into 3 in the summer and 4 in the winter. So they might be tiny handfuls of feed, but the idea is it mimics their natural grazing, keeps ulcers at bay, and mentally is much better for them as well. And we do the same with hay. They get turned out plenty, but they also have hay in lots of small portions. But with the feeding, they all get in the summer Alfalfa Original, and in the winter they get Alpha Royal. And then in terms of the hard feed that goes with it, if they're lacking energy, they get Competition Mix, which is fast release. If they've got sufficient levels of energy, they get Stay Power Cubes, which is slow release. And in the winter, if they're looking to carry more condition than they're carrying, particularly, we try and feed them up quite a bit the first half of the winter, so then when they're working throughout January and February and they're as sharp as anything, they hopefully don't need, you're not starting off with skinny horses and need stuffing full of food and they're trying to buck everyone off the whole time, but they go into that period carrying plenty of weight. So during the winter, they go on to the build-up conditioning cubes. If they're getting small quantities of feed, which they normally get in the summer, then everything gets Ultimate Balancer, because the key thing is, apart from the digestive energy, that they also get the right amounts of vitamins and minerals. Now, if they're on big portions of feed in the winter, they probably get enough. We tend to feed it all year round, but it's particularly relevant in the summer.
So, Harry and Laura, spot on. And the only thing I would probably add, recovery post-event. It's not only just making sure that they've got the energy to make sure that they maintain their body condition, but recovery also includes muscle maintenance. So again, you're looking at the provision of the key amino acids, lysine and methionine. When you're looking at a bag of feed, you get crude protein level, but you want to look at the lysine and methionine levels as well, because they're the key building blocks of muscle proteins. Another thing to consider alongside the key amino acids for muscle function and recovery is provision of antioxidants. So we're familiar with vitamin C for the immune system, if you're not very well or getting the weather. So vitamin C is a powerful antioxidant, but also vitamin E, more so with muscle function, and selenium. So if you can supplement there, so Elite Sport Muesli has got that elevated level of vitamin E there. Saves you having to add in a supplement should you need it. Event horses and performance horses can be prone to tying up, which is linked to starch overload and sometimes protein, if protein's over-provided through forage as well as concentrate. So the most important thing is to look at the diet as a whole. So I would urge all you guys, if you could get your forage tested, Hamish, it's a good place to start. Check what protein's doing and then build a diet around that, just so you're not overloading anything there. Another consideration, we're heading into the winter, yes, but provision of electrolytes and hydration, particularly when travelling. You want to ensure that they're not getting dehydrated post-event. So feeding quick beets or sugar beets, just a way to get more hydration in there as well. Again, moving into the winter, cold weather colic can be a challenge if the horse is dehydrated. But just making sure all those bases are covered, as well as the baseline nutrition, is all I'd add there.
Well, thank you very much to Chloe. We are running over slightly. It's getting a little bit late, but I think I'd just like to ask these guys quickly, if you can, Laura and Harry, plans for the autumn and winter. You've had a fantastic season, both of you. Harry, we missed you at Badminton, we missed you at the Europeans, we missed you at Burley. What are your plans for the winter and for the autumn months?
So we're actually moving, we're very excitingly buying the yard, which is where I grew up, and where my father competed from, and we always knew it was going to be sold in September 2019, and we got our head around the fact about 5 years ago that we wouldn't be able to stay there. And anyway, in the last 6 months, we have been scrabbling everything together and trying to see if we can make that happen. So that's very exciting. It's going to be a big sort of deal for us to try and sort of take that on. So that's going to sort of slightly preoccupy us. We're competing on, we've got young horses going to Le Lion d'Angers, the Young Horse World Championships between now and then, Osberton, Blenheim. So we're sort of competing on between now and then. But then it's a case for the horses to have a proper break. I'm a big believer that horses go back in the field, we take their hind shoes off, turn them out in 2s and 3s, and you know they'll have sort of six or 8 weeks in the field, and then come in and start their road work again. So they'll get a break and then build up for 2020 and hopefully an exciting year with badminton and the possibility of going to Tokyo. And obviously we're all dreaming of that. And as we get closer to it, we'll start to see what becomes distant dreams or maybe vaguely realistic reality.
Well, exciting plans. Laura?
I'm not moving anywhere. I moved about 18 months ago, so I've done my moving. So I've got some of the young horses getting out and about, just 5 and 6 year olds, so just pre-novice and novice. I've got De Capo and Sir Papillon at Blenheim next week, and then the plan I think is to take London to Buccolo. He's come out of the Europeans so fresh and well, and he only did 8 minutes there, so the plan is to try and finish on a good note and put him to bed and bring him out next year. But yeah, he's in really good form, and he's absolutely delighted with himself. I don't think he realises he didn't finish the cross country, so I'd rather him be that way than feeling sorry for himself. So hopefully if he carries on feeling good, he'll go to Buccolo.
Well, you were very nearly there last year, so let's hope you can stop the prices winning everything. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this evening, and I think I can safely say that they've provided us with great entertainment, a lot of exercises that you can take home, whether you're competing yourself, whether they've inspired you to go home and practice. But I'd like to thank once again the guys here, and also to Sam and Anna Horrell, who have allowed us to have this demonstration from Dodson and Horrell. We move on. We've got one in December the 5th in Edinburgh, with Caroline Powell and Jeff Billington, so that surely will be very entertaining. This will be available online on YouTube, so you can have a look on YouTube in a couple of days' time and relive the demo all over again. I'm sure there's a lot that we haven't taken in that we can watch and certainly learn from. But for now, please put your hands together for Laura Collett and Harry Meade. Thank you very much to World Horse Welfare. All the proceeds from tonight go to World Horse Welfare and to Glenda's Spooner Farm. Good night, everybody. Safe journey home.